We will be racing, folks, the first race of the weekend here at Imatra as it celebrates its 60th anniversary. Watch the lights. We're about to go green. Carolina will have to wait. Red, then a green, and away we go. It looks like a cracking start for IAS. In fact, indeed it is. Lampinen is going to lose second place to Piers Jones, who's come up from row 2. But he hasn't. Piers Jones goes third. It is Paavalainen who is in fourth place. He did start on the front row. Paavalainen, I can tell you, by the way, is on his way as well. He started from pit lane, so we're racing here at Imatra. IAS leading from Lampinen. Piers Jones in third. Paavalainen fourth. Tenstad, Husari, Torama. So this is the first race of the weekend. Piers Jones back in third place, just losing touch with Lampinen slightly. Tenstad, the German. That's where the old track used to go off to the left there. But now they turn right. And one or two almost kissing the curb on the exit, but they're now going down the back straight. That's Kainalainen who is bringing up the rear. So IAS with a nice lead to have. So IAS on the TZ250. And it is basically Yamahas and Hondas with the odd Aprilia, etc. thrown in here and there. So down into the next chicane before the right-hand turn for the rail bridge. There's Kainalainen just at the end of that shot. Just going through the picture. But it is still IAS who leads. Lampinen and Piers Jones in third. Just a little gap has appeared between Lampinen and Piers Jones. So over the rail bridge they go. Oh, Lampinen carrying lots of speed out of the turn, coming up right on the back of his Finnish rival. So coming into SUF Helsinki and then into Mitra. Lampinen looking very much the part in second place. Good exit speed from him as well as IAS has a look around to see what's going on. Piers Jones is leading the train that is in third place. So they come then to complete lap number 1. And it's Rhino IAS who leads from Ari Lampinen. Third place, Richard Piers Jones. Timo Paavalainen in fourth. Stefan Tenstad in fifth. Matti Husari still in sixth place. Just waiting for Kainalainen to cross the line as well. So he has done that. So Kainalainen bringing up the rear. But it looks like it's developing into a two-way fight here in Imatra on lap number 2. Just half a second at the end of lap 1 between IAS and Lampinen. IAS using all of the road and a little bit of curb as well. Piers Jones is coming under pressure from Paavalainen too. So they're going down the back straight. The sound of these two strokes bouncing off the trees and hedges and all the furniture that's around this wonderful, wonderful racetrack. But IAS is managing to keep Lampinen at arm's length. Be worth keeping an eye on Paavalainen, bike 77, as he's behind Piers Jones as well. But it's still IAS from Lampinen. Out of the first of the two chicanes on this run into the right-hand turn before the railway bridge. This is the one that was adjusted recently. It is still IAS from Lampinen. Piers Jones still third, Paavalainen still fourth, but is it going to stay like that for much longer? Tenstad still holding fifth position. Husari is in sixth. And again, IAS has a look over his shoulder just to see where Lampinen is, and Lampinen gives him a little wink, I would imagine, and says, yeah, I'm still here. You better keep pushing hard because I'm going to take first place as soon as I can. So over the rail bridge they've gone into the right, then the little combination into the SUF Helsinki. And there is IAS, and where is Lampinen? So Lampinen, we seem to have lost Lampinen. He was in second position. But he's looks like Lampinen perhaps has retired on this second lap of 10. So here they come. And it is Piers Jones who will be in second place. Paavalainen will be in third. So over the line they go. And I think Lampinen could easily be a retirement on lap 2. What a shame. It was just building up between looking to be a two-way fight. I think that all the action now could be for second place, because Ias is certainly pulling further and further away from Piers Jones. There's only a second between Jones and Paavalainen in the battle for second place. And also Tenstad is not too far away behind in fourth. So here they come. There's the race leader now. Who is going to emerge in second position? It's still Piers Jones, I think, ahead of Paavalainen. So Ias on the exit. There is Piers Jones still, but Paavalainen is right behind him, and they put a little bit of distance between themselves and Tuorama and Tenstad. In fact, Tuorama's gone through. Oh, and here is Ari Lampinen. He is indeed a retirement. Well, I'm assuming he's a retirement. I think that says, I went straight on. So maybe the bike just not behaving as best as he was hoping, but as they came over the rail bridge, maybe he just went straight on. So Ari Lampinen, after putting in such a cracking qualifying session, certainly in Q2, and starting from the front row as well, and it looked like he was going to push this guy all the way, but Ias is in a very comfortable first place as things stand at the moment. But what's going on behind for second place between Piers Jones and Paavalainen? And Tenstad is dropping down the order as well. He's just gone into sixth position. So Ias is leading. It's Piers Jones, the British rider, in second. Paavalainen, the Finn, in third, but a very close third. Tuorama a little bit further back in fourth, ahead of Husari. The German rider Tenstad still holding sixth, and there's a big gap back to Huamanen, I should say. Moravara back in eighth, and Kainalainen now up into ninth, following the retirement of Lampinen. So Rhino Ias is still going. And a little bit of gap, a slightly bigger gap this time between Piers Jones and Paavalainen. He's found 0.3 of a second since the last timing sector. So Richard Piers Jones still in second place. Can he reel in the race leader Ias? At the moment, Paavalainen is more of a problem to him, but I tell you, that is now a bigger gap between second and third than we've seen on the previous 3 laps. So maybe Piers Jones will have to check the lap times to see who is doing what. Certainly the fastest lap of the race so far has just gone to Richard Piers Jones. Rhino Ias did that on lap 2, 2:18.6. But on that last lap, it was a 2:19.2 from Piers Jones, which was 0.6 of a second faster than Ias. They're all spread out a little bit now. Kainalainen has just crossed the line to begin his next lap, lap number 4. I think Richard Piers Jones is closing in on Ias. Now, Ias, of course, is on the 250. Piers Jones, he is riding the TZ350. But Piers Jones still in second place. He started on row number 2. And I think this is where, and I'm only guessing, but I think Lampinen went straight on here. And that's what elevated this man into second place. The sound of these two strokes as they blast around this wonderful circuit as the race leader comes into Mitra again, and that gap is coming down. Richard Piers Jones is closing on the race leader. It's now 1.7 seconds. Paavalainen might have a little bit more of an issue with Tuorama now. He may have to do a little bit to protect third place, but Richard Piers Jones is trying to reel in the race leader as they begin lap number 5. What a beautiful location to go racing, and certainly further back, it looks like Tuorama might be taking third place from Paavalainen as they go over the railway lines. Pavalainen still is holding on to third place, but Torama is closing and he's gaining on him, and also Tenstad is in there as well. Timo Pavalainen has got Torama almost breathing down his neck. There were 0.3 of a second between them as they crossed the line. So Richard Pearce-Jones trying to catch, but certainly Torama, well, it looked as if he was gaining, but I think Pavalainen has just pulled maybe something and just found maybe a little bit more of a gap. Tenstad is still in there as well in 6th place, but here come the first bikes on the road. EOS coming from Pearce-Jones. Now then, again, Torama trying to make up the ground on Pavalainen as they come down into the chicane, but not close enough to do anything about him just yet. But Pavalainen is going to have to work very, very hard if he's going to find himself on the podium at the end of this one, because Torama and Husari are keeping him very, very keen. Pearce-Jones, meanwhile, is definitely closing on the race leader as well. We've got 2 fantastic battles to entertain you with here in Imatra. Pearce-Jones is now less than a second down the race leader. And again, Pavalainen has just lost ground to Torama and Husari, are both gaining on him. Whether they can stretch that back out again. We could do with seeing what Richard Pearce-Jones is doing as well, or we can just see him in the distance there. Here they come. First 2 bikes on the road, very close together. Richard Pearce-Jones might just use the power of that 350 if he can along this straight. He might just gain some ground as they go over the finish line, as they reach the halfway point in this race. So here we go. It is still EOS from Pearce-Jones. The gap was 0.8 of a second. It's going to be something like that this time around as well. Yep, 0.8 of a second still. Then there's a gap back to the battle for third. Oh, and it's another intense battle. There's a 3-way fight as they come down into turn number 1. And all of a sudden, Husari is now threatening Torama. Pavalainen still has third place, but Husari is now, and he's got good exit speed as well. He's up in behind Torama, and he might be able to pull out past him as they come down to the chicane. It'll be a very bold move if he manages to do it right now, but unfortunately he can't. He holds back, but this is game on, folks. This is game on. Husari right on the back wheel of Torama, and Pavalainen just ahead of them as well. What a cracking dice this is. They've lost a lot of ground. They're scrapping that much between each other, these 3. They're losing ground hand over fist to EOS and Pearce-Jones, who's now 0.2 of a second behind EOS. So they're coming down into the chicane again. Richard Pearce-Jones, even if he does finish second, he'll still have the honour of being the fastest 350. Oh, he's got good speed out of the chicane as well. He'll just sit tight in behind EOS as they go into this next chicane. Maybe look to try and find a move, perhaps, once they get back on the power. So we are past race, halfway distance. We have EOS just ahead of Pearce-Jones. A big gap back to the battle for third place. And Torama is now in third, ahead of Pavalainen. Husari is very close by in 5th, and Pavalainen, having held third for much of the race, could find himself mugged in the space of less than a lap. So here come the first 2 on the road, and Pearce-Jones really carrying the speed, but maybe a little bit too wide on the exit. But he'll wind it back up as they come to complete what will be lap number 6 and begin lap number 7. So here comes Pearce-Jones trying as he can, but he still can't. 6/10 now. It was 2/10 back on the back straight, but he's lost 4/10 that time as Torama goes through. And he has really left the 2 guys behind him as Husari now goes up the inside, and Husari goes into 4th place. Husari out of the picture, goes in the 4th place. Pavalainen is back into 5th. So Husari now goes 4th. There they are. And Pavalainen, who was in 3rd place, now finds himself back in 5th. Markku Torama is in 3rd. It'll take some going from here until the checkered flag if he's going to reel in the 2 guys ahead of him. And again, Pearce-Jones just on this back straight certainly seems to have the measure of EOS, but unfortunately for him, for the British riders, they get back down towards the end of the lap. Oh, that was neat from Hussari. You couldn't have got much tighter than that. But certainly Piers Jones, just on this stretch, it seems, to the checkered flag, just seems to lose out to the race leader, who manages to somehow stretch it back out. Having said that, Piers Jones is right on his back wheel, and he just had to hold off there for a moment. Piers Jones just had to hold off just for a second. No room for heroics around this section of the Imatra circuit, the Jarno Saarinen circuit. So Piers Jones right on the back wheel. This is good for him. So they come up over the railway bridge. Eos has another look around again to see what's going on. Now I'd say Eos is just a bit stronger through SUF Helsinki and Mitra than the British rider, and that's where, when they come back out of this little combination of right-left here, the Finnish rider, the race leader, just seems to have that little bit extra. Piers Jones a little bit neater this time, it has to be said, coming through that section. And maybe this time he might try and get him on the brakes into turn one if he can get close enough as they go over the start-finish line again. This is as close as Richard Piers Jones has been on this section at any time during the race. Half a second between them. Can he gain ground on the brakes? The trouble is sometimes you don't want to do that because you'll end up squaring off the turn and it'll cost you time. It will certainly cost you exit speed. Richard Piers a little glance around to see what's going on behind. And what's going on behind is Torama still holding a solid third place. Pavalainen has not given up on at least fourth from Hussari. There's still little between them. But Eos is still holding off Piers Jones. Now then, is Piers Jones biding his time? Or is this as good as it gets from the British rider? Can he find that little extra something he needs? Has he been keeping something up his sleeve until the later stages of this race? Oh, and they've got Kainalainen ahead of them. Kainalainen's having all sorts of issues with that machine, unfortunately. That was the machine that refused to start, but he eventually did get going just in time for the start of this race, and they began from pit lane. But meanwhile, he has from Piers Jones. Again, you just see Piers Jones just has that little bit more oomph on the exit of turns. They could do with catching Kainalainen out of Mitra, but I think they're going to come across him before then. They could do with passing him over the rail bridge, and I think they might just manage to do that. Certainly the race leader will. Will Piers Jones manage to? That's the other thing. I'm not so sure. Piers Jones might have to say, oh, he might just have to tuck in. I fear this is what might happen. And Kainalainen becomes the filling in the sandwich, and that may be, folks, the race as far as Richard Piers Jones is concerned. That's just possibly costing Kainalainen. You can see now that gap is much bigger at this point than it has been. But Richard Piers Jones just coming across Kainalainen at the wrong part of the track. It worked beautifully for Eos. So it looks as if, as we begin the penultimate lap, now unless Piers Jones can find something over the last 10 kilometers of this race, he's got his work cut out now. So Richard Piers Jones looking increasingly like he'll have to settle for second place. However, it's not over yet, folks. Torama now coming up across Kainalainen. So 1.7. Oh, he's brought it down by 7/10. So Piers Jones is catching him. However, he has to find that second, and he has to find somewhere to get past the race leader with less than 2 laps to go. So down the back straight they blast. Eos from Piers Jones. It's been pretty much these two all the way. Ari Lampinen, of course, was in the picture until he retired early on. But Richard Pearce-Jones just has a little bit of speed through the chicanes. He just seems to take it a bit more centrally, if you know what I mean. A little bit more power, and he's closing that gap right up, so it isn't all over. We have another lap after this one as well. So Richard Pearce-Jones, maybe, as I suggested a while ago, maybe he had a little plan and he was timing it and wanted to pick up, and the race leader, you don't want to be looking back because that's costing you time. So Richard Pearce-Jones has closed back up, and all that ground he lost at this part of the course on the previous lap, he's now made it back up. However, it's put his plans back a lap. But if he did have a plan, he's going to have to execute it. You can just see there the different lines they both take. And I think it cost Richard Pearce-Jones just a little bit of momentum on the exit of Mitra as they come down over the crest into the dip. So we are on the final lap. One lap to go. Less than a second between first and second place. Waiting for Torama to come through. Indeed, there he is. Meanwhile, Pearce-Jones out of turn one over the railway line. Lots of speed. Anias, having led for all the way, he will be gutted if he loses this one now. And Richard Pearce-Jones is closing in on the race leader. But where can he get him? You feel really this now. Pearce-Jones, if he can get this, oh, there's another rider up ahead, but Pearce-Jones, if he can get the speed and if he can get tucked in behind and maybe a little bit of a slipstream perhaps to go down the back straight and maybe on the brakes going into the chicane, then perhaps Pearce-Jones can take this race. Here we go. Is he going to pull out of the slipstream here? Here he goes. Pearce-Jones up the inside there, side by side, and the British rider goes through and he takes the lead. Can he get it stopped in time? Indeed he does. Tips into the chicane. We have a new race leader with only a couple of kilometers to go. Richard Pearce-Jones, and there's a slower rider. It's Moravara in front. And this will work for Pearce-Jones. Indeed it will. Really work well for him. Oh dear, oh dear. And that, you can see the momentum has just been lost by Ias. And Richard Pearce-Jones on the Yamaha TZ350 comes through over the railway bridge. Well, I suggested that he'd blown it, that Kainalainen had managed to get in his way, but Jones is looking very, very good for the race win now as he comes into SUF Helsinki and round into Mitra. So here comes Richard Pearce-Jones. You can see the gap further back now. So Richard Pearce-Jones will cross the line. The first 350. Ias will be the first 250 home. He'll have that consolation. But it is Richard Pearce-Jones who takes the first victory of the day here at Imatra in the ICGP class. Here he comes to take the checkered flag. And it is the British rider who wins in Imatra.